It was a calm and peaceful morning on Earth. The sun rose slowly, casting a soft golden light over the sprawling Earth orphanage. A gentle breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves as the children played outside. Among them was Elias, a young boy with dark brown hair and wide, curious eyes. He had lived at the orphanage for as long as he could remember. For him, it was home, a place where he found safety, warmth, and the comfort of other children who, like him, had lost their families. The orphanage stood on the outskirts of a small town. It was surrounded by green fields and tall leafy trees. Birds chirped happily as they flew overhead, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Elias had always loved this time of day, when the world seemed so peaceful and full of promise. It was a simple life, but it was enough. Elias sat on the soft grass, his legs crossed in front of him, watching the younger kids run around. Some were playing tag, while others were drawing pictures on the ground with sticks. The head caretaker, Mrs. Leela, was nearby, chatting with the other staff as they prepared breakfast. Everything was normal. Everything was calm, but then a loud sound broke through the morning stillness, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Elias's feet. He stood up, heart racing, looking around to see where the noise was coming from. The air felt thick, as if something terrible was about to happen. The birds scattered into the sky, flapping their wings in panic. Before Elias could process what was happening, the ground beneath him trembled violently. It was like the world itself was shuddering in pain. The windows of the orphanage shattered, sending glass flying through the air in all directions. The force of the explosion threw Elias to the ground, his ears ringing from the blast. Panic set in as the children screamed, some running toward the building, others frozen in shock. Elias's heart pounded in his chest, and his breaths came in shallow gasps. He struggled to his feet, his legs shaky. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, but it was nothing compared to the horror that had just unfolded. The once peaceful orphanage was now a war zone. Black smoke billowed into the air, rising from the wreckage of what had once been their safe haven. Elias turned to look back at the building, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. The roof had caved in, and the walls were crumbling, leaving nothing but dust and debris behind. The sound of explosions continued, echoing in the distance, as if the entire world was under attack. "Get inside. Get inside, now," shouted Mrs. Leela, her voice trembling with fear. She ran toward the children, urging them to follow her. Elias's legs moved on their own as he ran, but his mind was stuck on one thought: who could have done this? Who would attack innocent children? The chaos outside was overwhelming. People were running, shouting, and some were crying. Elias could hear distant explosions and the unmistakable roar of ships flying overhead. The sky had turned dark, as if a shadow had fallen over the earth itself. The peaceful morning was gone, replaced by an all-consuming fear that gripped everyone around him. Elias's feet carried him inside the building, where the other children huddled together. The once cheerful halls now seemed cold and dark, filled with the sound of worried voices and heavy breathing. His heart still raced as he tried to process what had happened. His world, his home, had just been torn apart. But one thing was clear to him now: whoever had attacked them wasn't going to stop. This was only the beginning. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. The world had never felt so broken. After the bombing, the once vibrant Earth orphanage was reduced to ruins, its peaceful grounds now stained with dust and the cries of the injured. Elias could hardly believe what had happened. Just hours ago, the sun had been shining, and the children had been laughing now. The world seemed to have changed in the blink of an eye. Elias stood in the midst of the chaos, trying to make sense of the destruction around him. The cries of other children echoed through the air, and the sound of sirens grew louder. The smell of smoke and burning wood filled his nostrils, and the earth beneath his feet still trembled from the aftershocks of the explosions. But it wasn't just the building that had been destroyed. It was the very fabric of their peaceful existence. He felt a deep, aching emptiness inside, a sense that something much bigger was at play. "Where are the others?" Elias whispered to himself, his heart racing. He needed to find his friends, the ones he'd grown up with in the orphanage. He turned around, scanning the rubble, but everything was a blur of debris. Smoke clouded his vision, and he could barely make out any shapes through the haze. His fingers trembled as he brushed some dust from his face, his eyes burning from the heat in the air. As he moved through the wreckage, the reality of the situation began to set in. There was no time to mourn. There was no time to wonder why this had happened. Elias knew one thing for sure: the world had just entered a new era. The peaceful existence humanity had known was over. This was war, and it was here to stay. He reached the edge of the destruction and spotted a group of soldiers, humans like him, but dressed in tactical armor and holding weapons. They were shouting commands, rallying the survivors, organizing the chaos. Their presence made the whole situation feel even more real. There was no running away from this anymore. The soldiers weren't here just to rescue them. They were here to fight. Ilias's pulse quickened as he approached them. The thought of what they would do next, what they would face, filled him with both fear and adrenaline. "We need to evacuate," one of the soldiers said, her voice firm but calm. "We can't stay here. It's too dangerous." "Where do we go?" Elias asked, his voice barely audible, caught in a mixture of awe and panic. The soldier looked down at him, her eyes softening for a brief moment. "We'll take you to safety, but listen closely. There's no hiding from this anymore. Whoever did this, they've just started." The words struck Elias like a physical blow. The thought that this was just the beginning, that the world was now a battlefield, made his stomach churn. As he was ushered toward a transport vehicle, his mind raced. His thoughts were still stuck on the orphanage, on the lives lost, on the unanswered question of who had done this. But there was no time to dwell on it. The war was just beginning, and humanity had to fight. As the vehicle moved, Elias watched the world outside change. What had been a peaceful morning was now a landscape of fear and uncertainty. Cities burned in the distance, their once proud silhouettes now consumed by smoke. There were no signs of calm anymore, no place left untouched by the chaos that had erupted. Elias felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: everything had changed, and there was no going back. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie red glow over the war-torn landscape. Elias stood at the edge of the makeshift camp, his eyes scanning the horizon. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the air was heavy with the smell of smoke and destruction. It had been days since the attack on the orphanage, and although the chaos had momentarily subsided, something even darker lingered in the air. A new kind of fear had settled over the world. Humanity was no longer the passive, peaceful race it had once been. The shock of the bombing, of the violence thrust upon them, had sparked a fire that could not be extinguished. But with that fire came an unrelenting question: who had done this? And why had they attacked innocent lives? The answers were elusive, and as the days passed, the answers seemed less and less important. What mattered now was survival, retaliation, and securing a future in a world that seemed to have lost its way. Elias had become a part of something much larger than he had ever imagined. His once simple life as an orphan had been replaced by the grim reality of war. As he walked through the crowded camp, he could see the faces of survivors, young and old, each one marked by the same look of uncertainty. Some had lost everything, others just their homes. But all of them shared one thing in common: the need for revenge, the need to fight back. He stopped near a group of soldiers who were huddled around a map, pointing at various locations marked in red. The commander had briefed them on the next mission. They were to infiltrate an enemy stronghold, one of the many scattered across the planet, and gather intelligence. The soldiers around him talked in hushed tones, their voices tinged with both determination and fear. It was clear that they didn't fully know what they were walking into, but there was no turning back now. Elias felt a hand on his shoulder, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to find a young woman standing beside him, her face hardened but kind. She was a fellow soldier, someone he had met during the evacuation. Her name was Ava, and she had been fighting for days, like Elias. But there was a quiet strength about her that made Elias feel like he wasn't alone in this world anymore. "You ready for this?" Ava asked, her voice steady but low. Elias nodded, though his heart was racing. "As ready as I'll ever be." She gave him a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're all in this together. Stick close to me, and we'll make it through." The two of them joined the rest of the squad as they set out. The journey to the enemy's stronghold was long and perilous, filled with treacherous terrain and constant threats of ambush. Every step they took seemed to echo louder than the last. Ilias's mind raced with thoughts of what they might find. Could they really defeat the forces that had shattered their world? Could they really stand a chance against the unknown enemies who had brought this war to Earth? The silence between them was broken by the sudden sound of distant explosions, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The reality of the situation hit Elias like a wave. This wasn't just a mission. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle for everything they had ever known. Their way of life, their homes, their families, it was all at risk. And it was up to them to take back what had been lost. With a final deep breath, Elias tightened his grip on the weapon at his side. The mission ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he was no longer the boy from the orphanage. He was a soldier now, and the fight for humanity's survival was just beginning. The landscape before Elias was a blur of dirt and debris. As he and the squad moved deeper into the enemy's territory, the world around him felt like it had been ripped apart and stitched back together. Every step forward was heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The distant sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the hills, signaling that the war was far from over. But it wasn't just the war that made Elias uneasy, it was the feeling that something was wrong, that something much darker was lurking just beyond their reach. The team had been moving for hours, navigating through forests and craggy cliffs. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the stronghold, gather intelligence, and, if possible, disable the enemy's operations. Simple enough. But nothing had gone according to plan. Every village they passed had been abandoned, the houses left in ruins, with no signs of life. The only evidence of humanity was the scorched earth, the remnants of what had once been thriving settlements. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the enemy was closer than they realized. Ava, who had been leading the squad, stopped suddenly, her hand raised in a silent signal for them to hold. Elias crouched behind a large boulder, his heart racing. The air was thick with tension, and every sound seemed amplified. He felt his pulse in his throat as he scanned the sky above had turned a dull gray, the clouds swirling in ominous patterns. He had never seen the world look so hostile. What is it? Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. Ava didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on something in the distance. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. I think we're being watched. Elias's stomach twisted. He felt a chill run down his spine. They were too far from the main forces now, and any wrong move could be their last. The squad had been traveling alone for too long, and the further they went, the more they seemed to be slipping into a place of no return. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until finally a figure emerged from the shadows. A soldier human, or at least, that's what Elias thought at first. But as the figure stepped into view, he realized with a start that it wasn't one of their own. It wasn't even human. The being was tall and thin, its skin a pale, almost translucent shade that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Its eyes were too large, too alien, and it stared at them with an intensity that made Elias's blood run cold. Its movements were fluid, almost inhuman, as it advanced toward them with an eerie calm. Stay down, Ava ordered, her voice barely a whisper. But it was too late. The alien, if that's what it was, had already noticed them. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying them, before speaking in a voice that echoed in Elias's mind rather than his ears. You are not the ones we seek, the voice said, its tone cold and distant. But you will do. Elias's breath caught in his throat. The creature was speaking directly to him. He could feel the words like a presence inside his skull, like they were carved into his very thoughts. Before he could react, the alien raised its hand, and a flash of light erupted from its palm. Elias barely had time to react as the ground shook violently and the earth beneath them cracked open. The explosion sent them all tumbling backwards, knocking the breath from Elias's lungs and scattering the squad in every direction. His head spun as he struggled to regain his bearings. When he finally managed to push himself up, the alien was gone. In its place, the faintest whisper of smoke lingered in the air, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The squad members began to gather themselves, but Elias could feel the weight of the encounter pressing down on him. They had crossed a line. This was no longer just a battle between humans and unknown invaders. Something more powerful, something far more dangerous, was pulling the strings. What was that? Elias gasped, his voice hoarse. Ava's expression was grim. That was no ordinary soldier. We've just encountered something far worse than we imagined. The realization hit Elias like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a war for survival. It was a fight for humanity's very existence. And whatever these invaders were, they weren't just here to conquer, they were here to wipe out everything. The mission had shifted. What had started as a simple infiltration to gather intelligence had quickly turned into a desperate scramble for survival. Elias felt the weight of every step as he and the squad made their way deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Each moment felt like a countdown to something worse. The knowledge that they were being hunted hanging over them like a storm cloud. They had barely managed to escape the encounter with the alien soldier, and the tension among the squad was palpable. No one spoke much as they moved through the dense forest, their eyes darting constantly to the shadows, expecting something or someone to jump out at them at any moment. The constant hum of distant explosions and the faint sound of sirens kept them on edge. The war was everywhere, and nowhere was safe. Elias's mind raced as he tried to process what had happened. The alien's presence had shaken him. But what unsettled him most was the overwhelming sense that they had been drawn into something much larger. The alien had spoken to them as though they were insignificant, like pawns in a game they didn't understand. The realization gnawed at him, threatening to consume him entirely. "We need to find shelter." Ava's voice broke through his thoughts, her tone sharp. "We'll rest here for a few hours, then keep moving." The squad nodded, though Elias could sense the unease in their eyes. They had been moving for what felt like days without rest, and exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. But there was no time to stop for long. The further they traveled, the more dangerous it became. They needed to find the enemy stronghold and gather the intel. But now it felt less like a mission and more like a race against time to stay alive. They set up camp in a small clearing, careful to stay hidden from the prying eyes they knew were out there. The wind rustled the leaves above them, but there was something unnatural about the silence that surrounded the camp. Even the animals seemed to have gone quiet, as if they too were aware of the looming threat. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even here, deep in the woods. As the squad settled in, Elias found himself staring at the makeshift map they had been using. There were marked locations, enemy camps, supply routes, and various points of interest. But the one place that stood out to him was marked in bold red letters: the Citadel. It was the heart of the enemy operation, the place where their forces were being coordinated. The mission had always been to get there, to gather intel and find a way to strike at the core of the enemy's strength. But now, with the alien soldiers on their tail, the task seemed almost impossible. Ava crouched beside him, her expression grim. "We're getting closer, but I don't think we'll make it without backup." Elias nodded. There was no denying the truth. They were alone, cut off from the main forces, and the enemy's reach seemed limitless. Every plan they made felt like it was falling apart, and with every passing hour, the reality of the situation became harder to ignore. They were running out of options. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped, and the forest seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching longer. Elias wrapped his arms around himself, trying to fight off the chill, but the cold wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something he couldn't escape. In the distance, the sound of heavy footsteps made his blood run cold. The squad immediately went silent, their faces pale with fear. They knew what was coming: another attack. Ilias's heart hammered in his chest as he scrambled to grab his weapon. The sounds grew louder, closer. Eva whispered urgently, "Get ready, this is it." But just as quickly as the sounds had appeared, they stopped. The quiet returned, thick and suffocating. Elias held his breath, listening intently, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no distant voices. The silence was deafening. Ilias looked around at his squad, and the fear in their eyes mirrored his own. They had no idea what was happening, or what was out there. But one thing was clear: they weren't going to make it through this war by simply running from danger. They had to fight. The realization hit Elias with a sudden clarity. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting for something greater, the survival of humanity. They couldn't run forever. It was time to stop hiding and take the fight to the enemy. With a deep breath, Elias steadied himself, gripping his weapon tightly. They had no idea what was waiting for them, but they were going to face it together. And whatever came next, they would fight to the end. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm just waiting to break. Elias and the squad had moved forward under the cover of night, the shadows stretching long around them as they navigated the unfamiliar terrain. They had crossed the river, passed through dense underbrush, and were now on the edge of the enemy stronghold. It wasn't just a military outpost, it was a fortress, towering above the landscape with walls that seemed to hum with an energy all their own. The Citadel, as the intelligence had called it, loomed before them like an unbreachable wall. But this was it. This was their moment. Elias could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. The squad had come so far, endured so much, but now, standing at the precipice of what could be their greatest challenge, doubt crept in. Would they make it through this? Could they even infiltrate the Citadel and make it out alive? The doubt wasn't a stranger. It had whispered to him throughout the journey, lurking at the back of his mind, gnawing at his resolve. But there was no turning back now. They had a job to do. Ava, who had led them through thick and thin, signaled for them to halt, her finger pressed to her lips. The squad dropped to their knees, moving quietly, their breath held as they observed the Citadel's perimeter. The air was different here, thick with an unnatural hum. A soft, almost imperceptible energy field seemed to envelop the walls. Elias could feel it in his bones, a pulsing sensation that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "We need to find a weak point," Ava whispered, her voice barely a breath. "We've got one shot at this. Once we go in, there's no backing out." Elias nodded, though his heart was racing. His eyes scanned the wall, looking for any sign of an entry point. There were no gates, no open doors, just the smooth, dark surface of the citadel's outer shell. But then, as if by some twist of fate, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A section of the wall seemed to shift slightly, and for a moment, he thought it was an illusion. But no, it was real. The wall was opening, revealing a small, narrow passage. Ava noticed it too. This is our chance. Stay close. Move fast. They wasted no time, slipping through the narrow gap in the wall one by one. The interior of the citadel was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. It was eerily quiet, cold even, as if the building itself was alive and watching. The walls were lined with sleek, glowing panels, and the floor beneath their feet was smooth, almost reflective. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just trespassing in an enemy's stronghold, they were intruding on something far more sinister. As they moved deeper into the heart of the citadel, the squad remained in tight formation. Ilias's senses were on high alert, every footstep amplified in the stillness. There were no guards in sight, but the oppressive silence only added to the tension. They had no idea what kind of enemy they were facing inside, and the uncertainty gnawed at Elias's mind. "We're getting close," Ava murmured, her voice tense. "The intel says the command center is just ahead. We make it there, we find what we need, and we get out. No distractions." Ilias's mind raced. He was still reeling from their last encounter with the alien soldier, and the thought of facing whatever else lurked in this place made his stomach turn. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from ahead, a low hum, followed by the unmistakable clank of metal. Elias's pulse quickened. They weren't alone. Ava raised a hand, signaling for the squad to stop. "Stay still," she whispered. "We're not the only ones here." Ilias's breath caught in his throat. His heart was pounding, and his grip on his weapon tightened. He had no idea what they would find, but one thing was certain. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. The citadel was alive with danger, and every moment felt like they were stepping deeper into the heart of darkness. The fight for humanity's survival had never felt more real, and it was about to get a whole lot more dangerous. The silence was deafening. Ilias's heart thundered in his chest as he pressed himself against the cool metal wall, trying to steady his breathing. The enemy had seen them. He could hear their voices, harsh and alien, echoing in the hallway just ahead. The squad was huddled together, breaths shallow, waiting for the inevitable. The citadel had been nothing like what they expected, twisting corridors, shifting walls, and now enemy patrols closing in on their position. Time had run out. The quiet hum of the walls felt like the ticking of a clock, counting down to their discovery. Ilias's mind raced. They had to move. They couldn't afford to get trapped here, not with the intel they had gathered so far. But every exit seemed to be blocked, every path leading to more danger. Ava, as always, remained calm, her eyes scanning the area, calculating their next move. The others were tense, gripping their weapons and shifting uncomfortably, but there was no panic. "Not yet. We need to get to the central core," Ava whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "If we destroy the system, it's over for them. We can stop this war." But Elias wasn't so sure. The citadel felt like a living thing, its very walls pulsating with an energy he couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just a weapon, it was something more, something ancient. He could feel it deep in his bones, a cold shiver that crawled up his spine whenever he focused too hard on the walls around them. And now, with enemy soldiers closing in, they were running out of options. "Move, now," Ava ordered, breaking through his thoughts. They darted through the hallways, using the shadows as their only cover. The hum of the citadel seemed to grow louder, its pulse quickening as they neared the central core. Ilias's thoughts were a blur. He couldn't focus on anything except the mission and the nagging voice in his head, telling him that they were running out of time. Each corner they turned seemed to bring them closer to something unimaginable, something they weren't ready for. Then, it happened. The door ahead of them opened with a hiss, revealing a vast, circular chamber. The walls were lined with glowing panels, and at the center, a massive pulsating orb floated above the ground, suspended in the air. Elias stopped in his tracks, staring in disbelief. The core, the heart of the citadel. But there was something wrong with it, something that didn't belong. The orb wasn't just powering the citadel, was alive, its energy pulsing with a rhythm that wasn't human. A voice shattered the silence. "So, the humans have arrived." Elias spun around, his weapon raised instinctively, but what he saw made him freeze in place. Standing before them was an alien unlike any he had encountered before, tall, slender, with dark, almost obsidian skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Its eyes were deep pools of black, and its presence radiated a strange, unsettling power. You shouldn't have come, the alien continued, its voice smooth and cold. This place is beyond your understanding. You are nothing but pawns in a game far older than your species. Ava stepped forward, defiance in her every movement. We'll see about that. This ends today. The alien smiled, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a smile of certainty, as though it knew exactly how this would play out. The air around them seemed to thicken, the walls of the citadel pulsing with an almost sinister energy. Ilias's mind raced. This was it. They had found the core, but they were too late. The enemy had anticipated their every move. He could feel the weight of the moment, the knowledge that this might be their last stand. His grip tightened on his weapon, but as he looked around, he saw the determination in the eyes of the squad. He wasn't alone in this. We may be pawns, Elias said, his voice firm, but we fight like humans, and we don't back down. Ava nodded, signaling the squad to take their positions. The fight was far from over. Even if they couldn't destroy the citadel, they could still make sure the enemy knew they had come. The stakes were higher than ever, and as Elias charged forward, heart pounding in his chest, he knew one thing for certain: the war had only just begun, and this time, humanity would not be the ones to fall.